Hello, Pastor Nathan of Grace Lutheran Church here with a sermon that was preached on the fourth Sunday after the Epiphany, which landed on February 2nd, 2025. If you want the video of me reading the readings that the sermon is based on, you can find that somewhere in the description, or if you want the bulletin or even the whole service that this sermon came from, you'll find that link somewhere in the description as well. But before we begin, let's have a word of prayer. God of life and love, open our hearts this day that our eyes may see and our ears hear your very real and gracious presence with us, granting us peace and mercy through Jesus Christ. Amen. So earlier this week, I find myself not unusually predisposed in the washroom, taking care of some business, when a knock came on the door. Now, this isn't unusual either, as in our house, the boundaries around our private time aren't always set, or even respected if they were. But hey, at least the door didn't swing open, am I right? Anyway, I have to admit that I was a bit perturbed with the interruption because, you know, that business isn't going to take care of itself. But before I could say anything, I heard our daughter call from the other side of the door. "Yo, when you're done, can we hang?" Those were her exact words. And how can I stay annoyed at that? You know, I'm at a stage in my parenting where our kids are wanting less and less to hang out with their parents, talk to their parents, or even be seen in the same vicinity as their parents. So it was a nice surprise. I mean, for our little girl to knock on one of the most sacred doors in our home, to so politely request to spend time together, you know, I almost felt bad for being annoyed that my me time was yet again interrupted. So needless to say, I finished up my business lickety-split, not literally, and I went to find her to see what she had in mind for our hang sesh. Well, I found her in the kitchen, and I asked if she still wanted to hang. She said yes, and I asked where. She looked at me and laughed, and I was thinking, that wasn't really a joke. But she led me to where I keep some of my exercise equipment and just stood there. And I thought, what the heck? And then it hit me. You know, I realized what was going on, and and a second or so later, so did she. It turns out that she didn't want to hang, as in hang out, but she wanted to hang, as in literally hang off my chin-up bar. And since she isn't tall enough to set it up or even reach, she needed my help. You know, I chuckled a bit when I realized how my mishearing her led to such a wild misunderstanding. I mean, I was a bit disappointed, of course, but I still find it funny how I thought I heard what I thought I heard and how I reacted to that assumption. I hurried to finish what I was doing. I put aside plans to get some work done at my desk. And I look forward to spending some time with the youngest of our offspring and the last one who would actively ask to hang out, even when that wasn't what she was doing. Of course, this has happened to many, if not all of us, in the past in some way, right? We have misheard others. We've been misheard by others. We've all landed in some sort of misunderstanding because of it. It's a part of life. But sometimes it can be a problem when the misunderstanding goes too far. Past the embarrassment of such a simple mistake, I've known people to get downright angry at the other, like the misunderstanding was their fault. I don't know, maybe they felt like they were being led on, intentionally deceived, or somehow manipulated. Maybe they still don't see the misunderstanding or mistake and want to prove their point, or maybe the sting of just the thought of being maybe wrong set them off enough to not let go. And so I wonder if it's this sting of disagreement, discouragement, and perhaps disappointment that the people of Nazareth were feeling when they're trying to hurl Jesus off a cliff. Like we talked about last week, Jesus was in his hometown attending his church, where he read a beautiful, comforting, and probably familiar text out of Isaiah that proclaimed good news, freedom, and the year of the Lord's favor. You know, imagine hearing the kid you watched grow up saying this to you, reaffirming everything that you were taught and already thinking. Imagine watching one of your hometown boys show such maturity, faith, and ability to read. Imagine the pride you'd feel in seeing someone who you maybe babysat at one point reassure you of God's promises, God's favor, God's love toward you. And then imagine that same kid suddenly saying what he really meant. Imagine that little homie shattering your dreams of being exclusive, favored, and set apart. Imagine Jesus telling you that God didn't want to just hang with you, but also with those you don't particularly like or think deserve that kind of blessing. And that's what basically Jesus did. I mean, he reminded them how Elijah wasn't just for the people of Israel, but for those outside their borders as well. He recalled how Elisha didn't help only those behind their exclusive walls of exclusion, but opened the doors for all. He revealed to them how God is a God of great love, grace, and mercy. And this offended them enough that they wanted him dead. Really dead. Or so dead that it wasn't enough to just throw rocks at him like how they traditionally deal with heretics. But they wanted to throw him at the rocks by tossing him off a cliff. And so angry were they at their misunderstanding that they wanted him dead. So hurt were they at their misguided assumption that they retaliated with violence. So offended were they at a message of grace and mercy that they completely closed their minds and ears and couldn't comprehend or even fathom how wrong they actually were. But I get it. I mean, it isn't easy. Taking responsibility in a gross assumption gone wrong, it takes humility. Seeing the role that we play in a misunderstanding takes strength and respect for the other. Admitting wrong, believe it or not, takes love. Love for the other, love for ourselves, and love for God and God's wisdom and teaching. See, when Jesus explained how Elijah and Elisha helped those outside of Israel's borders, and Jesus didn't say that those within the borders are excluded. When they heard Jesus saying that the other is welcomed into the favor of God, he didn't say that they were no longer welcome. When Jesus revealed just how big God's love and mercy is, he didn't say that it was only for a select few and not anyone else. Rather, Jesus was saying that this love is for everyone, all people, for all of time. So they were offended at God's generosity. They wanted to kill this message of inclusivity. They rejected the notion that they weren't the most righteous, the most faithful, the most deserving of God's blessing. Thankfully, though, just because that's what they were thinking, that doesn't make them right. Just because they assumed that Jesus meant something that Jesus didn't mean, it doesn't mean that Jesus was wrong. And just because they were so offended by the expansive and unending love of Jesus that they tried to kill him, it doesn't mean that this message would end, that God's love would cease, that the darkness would overcome the light. See, Jesus walking through their midst and leaving them wondering if they were successful in driving him out or not, tells us that Jesus remains untouched by their anger, unchanged by their self-righteous indignation, and undisplaced by their misplaced offense. Jesus not staying dead 3 days after being crucified shows us how God's love for all of God's people is bigger than any kind of bullying, name-calling, and mean tweeting. This message of grace and mercy, still lasting to this day, reveals to all people how short-sighted, narrow-minded, and downright wrong people, or how downright wrong people can be, regardless of where they're from, what color their skin is, or the amount of worldly power they might have. The point is that God's love is patient and kind. It's not boastful or arrogant or rude. It keeps no record of wrongs, but it flows out from the heart of God and upon all of us, full of grace and mercy, and it shows us how we, along with all of God's people, are welcome, can find belonging, and are saved. The world can be a difficult place to navigate these days. We're faced with decisions, allegiances, and wild misunderstandings. But it's important that through it all, we not forget that we are God's people, not because we climbed some spiritual ladder, but because God has decided to include us, bless us, and love us. And we mustn't forget that this is God's eternal, that this God's eternal message that cannot be discarded, destroyed, or distorted by us, the world, or anyone in all of history, as God continues to be God, whether or not we admit to it, acknowledge it, or accept it in our hearts. God will continue to love and be love with us, through us, and in spite of us. So in this season after the Epiphany, may we continually be humbled by the unending, unchanging, and everlasting message of God's grace and mercy, that we might learn to love just as we have first been loved through Jesus Christ. Thanks be to God. Amen.